will lose my mind today.
Hey, it's the Union of the Unwanted. We're live, right?
And
Ricky?
you dig it!
We are live. Thanks, guys, for joining us for another Union of the Unwanted episode hosted by myself, Ricky Varandas from the Ripple Effect Podcast, Mike from the OBDM Show, Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat, and of course, Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions. Today's going to be a really fun show. This is actually, well, first of all, guys, the unionoftheunwanted.com. Go there, get some merch. We got merch available. Apparently, we got some Cash Daddy merch already, too, huh? Nice, representing. So get some of that stuff, too.
Always be closing, brother. Always be closing.
So let's get Mike. How about you introduce our topic today?
Oh my God. Do I have to?
Yeah, this is right down
I'm
your
excited.
Sure. This is Cryptozoology. I guess we're going to be talking about monsters. I do have like a few stories we can talk about right up front to kind of jumpstart stuff. But, you know, this is going to range from Mothman, Bigfoot, Dogman. It could be elves, dwarves, whatever you want, whatever fits in the cryptozoology realm. The last time that I really dove deep into this topic with somebody on my show was with Hero Paranormal. And he was on the OBDM podcast, and he was talking about his experience being around Skinwalker Ranch and a lot of the things that he encountered around there. And he had incredible stories, firsthand encounter stories of just crazy stuff that happened to him out there. So, I mean, this can go anywhere we want.
I'm super excited about this, and I'm glad everybody's here. Thank you so much. I know that Dr. Meldrum on. I have most of you guys on my podcast, and I think this is one of the more exciting topics to talk about because you basically have to unlock, in my humble opinion, this level of this realm to be able to see all this stuff. And for those that don't want to do that, this seems like crazy talk, but to me, it's so real. And, you know, to have Dr. Meldrum here again, I always enjoyed talking to him, and always good to have readers on the show. And, you know, so I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to hear from everybody and their experiences because, you know, I don't think people talk about this topic enough.
Well, Mike, you left out Loch Ness Monster, and we have our own representative from the great Loch Ness. Mr. Kev Baker is finally joining us after about 80 repeated attempts on my part to get him on the show. I'm so happy you're here, Kev. Welcome.
Well, you know, when you swap the swamp monsters for real monsters, I'm here in a heartbeat.
I knew you'd be in.
Yeah.
So whoever wants to kick it off, I mean, I don't know where to start this.
Mike has
I mean,
stories. You want to go over maybe share some of your stories?
Yeah, because I think I got a story here. I'll bring it up on screen. You guys won't be able to see it, but people watching at home will be able to see this. This is probably a good place to start, and just with the headline itself. And this is titled "Ex-Soldier Claims Bigfoot with Special Powers Exists After POW Spots Humanoid." Now, this does come from the Daily Star UK, but there might be some interesting little tidbits here. A paranormal investigator has claimed one of his team witnessed the legendary beast Bigfoot, rumored to roam North America, but it vanished without a trace. Trey Hudson, who is director of the Oxford Paranormal Society and served in the U.S. military in Afghanistan as Operation Counterterrorism Officer, told the Daily Star about some of the phenomena he says his team has witnessed. He has been leading paranormal expeditions at top secret locations known only by his code name, the Meadow. And his new book, The Meadow Project, dives into what is considered the South's Skinwalker Ranch and is getting ready to be published. Over the years, Trey claims to have witnessed some truly bizarre things, and one of his expeditions has made him consider that Bigfoot could be much more than flesh and blood, and may even have special powers. And this is something that's been talked about within the cryptozoological community for a while. Being described as similar in appearance to Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, was allegedly spotted by a member of his own team in the middle of the night in a chilling encounter. Recalling the event, Trey said about 2 or 3 a.m. that evening, he saw a white humanoid-type shape peering around a tree watching our camp. He went to get one of our team members who has a very sensitive piece of thermal equipment, a very expensive FLIR unit, to see if she could detect the heat signature that this being was emitting. And by the time she woke up and gathered her wits, the equipment, and got out there, the entity was gone. Even weirder, he said that there was no physical evidence of the figure or animal standing in the spot where they were investigating. Trey added, "It is interesting to note that many members of my team are also trained in tracking. We know how to track a person through the forest, through the foothills, disturbances in the environment, compressed earth, compressed vegetation, etc. We went to the area and we had seen no disturbed vegetation, scuff marks, or any bark that was disturbed." And I can just leave it right there. This is just one little story that I've heard. I'm sure you guys have heard too, that Bigfoot is much more than just an upright walking ape, that it is something special and unique.
I'm going to just, I liked your word, the roarm. And I'm just going to roarm into this.
Oh, okay. I said roarm. I didn't know I said roarm, but okay.
I like that because it's like a swarm of like in all honesty, it seems like when you're speaking about these, in my opinion, everly evolving adversarial threats in the mind of humanity, Sasquatch, be it many of these cryptozoological entities, you find that there is no limit to some of the prowess and powers that they have, because they do seem to be at a level of evolution that surpasses us in at least some form. And with that, I'll roar them out of there.
Yeah, anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll say something here real quick. So I'm primarily a JFK researcher. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. And so I'm very critical when it comes to evidence. And I found, like, in the past couple months, I've seen enough things to make me want to open my mind that Bigfoot is a possibility. Where I start to get lost is when people start to talk about Bigfoot being interdimensional or somehow connected to UFOs. I change the channel because that stuff just really loses me. What's everyone else's opinion on that?
I disagree with you. So I was more I would goof on a lot of Bigfoot witnesses like 5 years ago, like really give them a hard time. And then the more I started reading some testimonies and firsthand encounters, I took them a little bit more seriously. There's been so many accounts of not only Bigfoot sightings, but Bigfoot sightings that happened within a very similar time period as UFO sightings as well. Stan Gordon wrote about this extensively in Silent Invasion, UFO and Bigfoot sightings that happened within the 60s and 70s in Pennsylvania. I don't know if there's a direct link, but there definitely seems to be activity of both those types of things in certain areas, and it's hard to dislodge the two. When you start talking about one, you start talking about the other. I don't know if they're directly related, but I'm more invested. I believe more now than I did 5 years ago.
Yeah. I think a guy named Bill Merrill in the 1980s became pretty popular because he was really making that whole lore of the paranormal Sasquatch, like the shape-shifting / portal jumping, UFO riding Sasquatch popular. And he appeared on lots of radio channels. I think he might have wrote a book about these Sasquatch. And in my first documentary I produced, The Unwanted Sasquatch, not Unwanted, we show like a segment from a TV show that was a talk show called Town Hall that was pretty popular in the 1980s. And Bill Merrill was on that talking about how Sasquatch had almost like a TV dial that he could phase himself in and out of our dimension and, the other dimensions that he lived in. And it just sounds like pure science fiction. None of that can be, I think with the UFO study that's actively going on by the Pentagon and civilian researchers like ourselves, and with the Bigfoot / Sasquatch phenomenon, you always get people that come to the forefront that talk about these more paranormal, unquantifiable, unprovable stories. And often they rise in popularity and become, bestsellers when they're making a book or trying to option a screenplay. So you really have to look at what's happening here. Is this like another David Wilcock, Corey Good type thing, or is this something that you can actually track factual accounts of? Are there multiple witnesses? Is there a police report? Was there footprints left at the scene? These are all the sort of things that I like to look for when I'm hearing about these stories. And I didn't have a sec yet to check out the article that Mike was sharing. I want to check that out. But if it has some of that stuff, then it would make it more provable to me. It would make it more interesting.
Well,
Otherwise,
it's a Daily Star article. I doubt it does. It's just it's
Highly
a jumping off
reputable.
point.
yeah, that's true.
And I, in all clarity, I'm not arguing that that's really happening, but I think consciousness of the witnesses may have more to do with the equation than most might think. And much like a mentalist can hold his audience and nearly have complete control over his quote unquote victims, this could be something where they're just outmatched on some level.
If I could chime in for a second, really quickly, there's an 1885 New York Times article, which I have pulled up. I have coming up on my show later this week regarding archaeologists finding human bones 3 to 4 times larger than what our skeletal structure is currently. And they also found some other mechanisms with it in Missouri, where these bones were also found that they at the time said, at least in the late 1800s, could not be replicated by current engineers or anything of the sort. So again, it was very quickly covered up after that. Very little was known after the article was written, but I did some digging. It is in their archives, and it was definitely reported back in 1885.
So I have a book right here put out by David Paulides called Bigfoot, Wild Man, and Giants. And this is just a collection of articles from newspapers that were put out ranging in the 1860s up until the early 1900s of people encountering wild men before the term Bigfoot was coined. And they're written down. You can read them for yourself in local newspapers. And it was just common folklore back then. Is like almost common knowledge that, hey, there's some hairy dudes in the woods and they'll mess you up, so just be careful. And it's like pretty well documented here. You could say these are all fictitious, but there are literally hundreds in this book, and I think some are absolutely real.
Yeah, along those lines, there's a guy named Timothy Renner. He's a Pennsylvania author, and he's written several books along those lines. And there's one book that he called Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, which interests me because I'm in Pennsylvania. And it's a very similar thing. It's called The Hairy Man, The Wild Man. And there's these old newspaper clippings of kids coming back from the woods saying what they saw, and then a bunch of guys going out looking for the thing. Or person, because I guess they didn't really know what it was, but the descriptions of them does seem to fit what we have going on today with people's experiences. So it's interesting that it goes back that far.
To add to that, I've been interviewing a guy named Thomas Steenberg, who's written like 3 different books on Bigfoot and Sasquatch history. And when I mentioned to him the skunk ape, or the Florida version of Bigfoot, or some people say it's in Mississippi as well, he's like, oh yeah, like I don't believe that for 1 minute. You think of all these wild, private wild animal zoos that people have down in these parts of the United States. There's like the Tiger King is a perfect example of that. And he believes that the skunk ape is just somebody that has grown tired of taking care of a chimpanzee or some other kind of greater ape that has released it into the wild. And I don't know if that's true, because they're based on the accounts and the sightings throughout history. you'd have to have like more than just a few private owners that had, released their exotic animal into the wild, and people are seeing that. There's actually a pretty famous photo. I can't remember if it comes from Florida or Mississippi, but it looks like an orangutan standing on the edge of somebody's backyard, like looking at them with like glowing eyes. And he used that as a perfect example for probably an escaped exotic animal. But I don't know, it looked a lot taller to me than an orangutan. But if you talk about, Mike was talking about this newspaper articles that have been published back in the 1800s of multiple wild man sightings that have happened throughout North America. A really good example of that, a popular one that I've shown in one of my documentaries, is the Jacko capture that happened in 1880 in northern British Columbia. This happened near Yale, British Columbia, a small town, and a train was stopped on its tracks at night because these people, the conductors, saw what looked like an ape lying across the tracks, and they didn't want to run it over. So they stopped the train, they got out, and this thing woke up and apparently tried to scale the bluff, the rock side that was near this train. And they lassoed it and they captured it and brought it back to Yale. And a doctor named Dr. Hannington examined its body and said it was like nothing he had seen before. It had a hand that was different from ours. Apparently, it didn't have like an opposable thumb. It had 5 fingers that ran in the same direction instead of one being divergent. And it was about 5 feet tall, covered in thick fur from head to toe, and apparently snapped a stick differently because it was super strong. Instead of breaking it like we do by putting it over an edge and cracking it over our leg, it could just twist it and snap it in half. So I listen to reports like that in history, and you got to take note that no one in North America in the 1880s would have had a private collection of wild animals that would suit that account. No gorillas, no greater apes were brought over to North America at this time and point in history. So what was that?
I don't know.
And I mean, and also that's people, if you ever hear people say, oh, why haven't we ever captured a Sasquatch? Why haven't we ever captured a Bigfoot? This is a perfect example of a capture that's been reported in history. And there's been many others. It's not just that one, it's just more modern days. We haven't heard of something like this happening. And there could be a reason for that. Maybe more of them have died off than there were in population earlier in our time on North America here.
Well, you bring up that it was around 5 foot tall, and there are reports of Bigfoot being upwards of even 9 foot tall in some accounts. But there is a bit of a split in the Bigfoot community, if you want to call it that. There's a side that firmly believes that Bigfoot is some sort of ape, some sort of North American ape, at least the ones we see around here in the United States of America and Canada. But then there's the other side of the Bigfoot community that believes it is an offshoot of humanity in some way. And the reason why DNA always comes back as human or non-primate is because it is partly human and some missing link. And those two communities do not get along very well together. I'm open to either. I'm just wondering, the Bigfoot people here, if you have an opinion on one side or the other.
Dr. Meldrum, you want to jump in?
Sure. Well, in my mind, it's kind of splitting hairs, because I know it creates quite a lot of polarity in the community, and it's really a lot of heat and not very much light. The two for example, two hypotheses that are both worthy of consideration that have been proposed by researchers from very early on. The first is a large ape, Gigantopithecus. Even Gigantopithecus has been contested through its history as to whether it's an ape or a hominin, a member of our family, an early offshoot of our family tree. And basically, I mean, it just shows how you can be close to that point of bifurcation, and the distinctions are kind of subtle. They're almost academic, but Gigantopithecus is the right size, the right place, the right time, would make a great ancestor and a candidate ancestor. On the other hand, some say, well, but bipedalism, evolution is fairly conservative. Bipedalism evolved once. That's a difficult statement to defend in today's knowledge of paleoprimatology and paleoanthropology that in these lineages, including amongst the apes. I mean, that's where it started, was amongst the apes. That's where the hominin lineage emerged. So if it is on the hominid side of that fork, it's got to be a fairly early offshoot, something like a robust Australopithecine. It doesn't, for all the chit and chat about it being more highly evolved and possessing of all these qualities and characteristics, its behavior and its anatomy suggests that it's a bipedal ape, or a bipedal hominin with a very small brain, not much bigger than that of a chimpanzee or gorilla. It has no material culture. I mean, unless you're of the kumbaya camp that say it doesn't need material culture. It has evolved beyond civilization and at one with nature. Okay, that's fine, but everything, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And this thing looks like a big bipedal ape. It behaves like it. It has the morphology, the robusticity, the small brain, the lack of material culture, the lack of home bases, lack of complex social structure. So that's kind of the nitty gritty of the split there.
My question on Bigfoot in general would be, if the government's aware of Bigfoot and they're suppressing that information, what is the government's rationale, or what would it be for suppressing it? And because I can understand why they would suppress all kinds of things about history and UFOs, but Bigfoot, what kind of impact would it have on society, and why would the government want to actively cover it up? And are they actively covering it up?
My personal experience is no. I've not had any inkling that there is an institutional policy or position. My encounters have been at the sort of the mid-management level. So whether it's Fish and Game or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, it's a district manager who doesn't want his reputation sullied or his credibility called into question, or to be challenged how federal or state dollars are being spent. And so, or his personal reputation that said his credibility. And I've had multiple experiences where that employees of people like that have shared those experiences. The kibosh has been put on any effort to pursue information or to discuss it publicly from an official position. But as far as some conspiracy, I mean, I've been doing this for how many years? Almost 3 decades, and no men in black have shown up pounding on my laboratory door, rifling through my files. So either I'm really good at one conference one time, I got a big laugh because we were having a panel discussion. I said, all right, I'm going to come clean. I'm a federal agent, and I've been charged with disseminating disinformation. And apparently I've been doing a pretty good job for the past 30 years, because look at you all sitting here listening to me. So, either I'm doing intentionally or unintentionally a good job of keeping people down barking up the wrong tree or going down the wrong primrose lane, or the other stories are just conflated. And if there's any motivation, either on a corporate or an institutional, federal level, it would be the only motivation I could possibly see would be the conservation ramifications. It's just like federal agencies in Idaho denied there were native wolves for decades, even though there were. There were repeated sightings. Oh, no, it was just a coyote. Because as soon as they acknowledged there were wolves, they would have to have a management plan. And unless that was a funded mandate, that meant resources from other projects would be siphoned off in order to meet the needs of a management program for wolves. So it was only after a court case when wolves had been reintroduced in Idaho, and there was a court challenge, and the federal court said, no, this was done improperly. You need to get those wolves back out of there. Oh, well, it's going to be tough to separate the introduced wolves from the native wolves because they were there all along.
If
Those kind of, I was just going to say, those kind of things are a possibility.
If I could ask to those that are such as yourself that are experts on this, what do you think the reaction would be to society as a whole with Bigfoot, say some type of acknowledgement relative to extraterrestrials in terms of mass panic or, you know, certain things like this? Do you think there's a difference or people would react similarly?
Well, I mean, I like to compare it to the narrative of the discovery of the gorilla. You know, that was a very threatening announcement to some people's belief system. And I've had some fundamentalist Christians who come up to me and said, no, you know, Sasquatch, the whole thing of Sasquatch is just a conspiracy to undermine religious belief in creation. And so there are some people who might react that way. But for most people, it's, you know, once that evolution of perception proceeds, it's remarkably similar. You know, you've got these stories of these mythical folkloric creatures. Then you get these man-like monster tales. You know, it's the most, Barnum, P.T. Barnum bills Gargantua as the most ferocious creature on the face of the planet. And then that ferocious creature is selling war bonds. And he becomes the poster child of the imperiled status of the tropical forests, you know, and we have Coco the gorilla admonishing us to take care of the planet, you know. So I could foresee the same kind of cycle of public opinion when it comes. I mean, we've already been through through several of those steps with Sasquatch already. We're well down that pike, and sure there would be some adjustments. It wouldn't rewrite the history or the science text at all. It would just add a footnote, really.
No one's going to care unless Bigfoot says something fucked up on Twitter 10 years ago. Then they'll get outraged. But pretty much I think the response will be the same as when the New York Times wrote the article about UAPs. It's kind of very tepid, very interesting to people like us. But by and large, the public was going like, well, what else is on Netflix?
When's the next UFC fight?
Yeah.
So I got a question for you, Dr. Meldrum. You were saying that, you know, in science, it's acknowledged that bipedalism can only happen once in evolution. But bipedalism can be learned, right? Because you look at the example of Lewis the gorilla, who's been living in Philadelphia Zoo for some years now. And he walks on his, walks bipedally everywhere. And he learned that from his father.
Right.
Like his father was the only other gorilla that walked like that and died. And now Lewis is the only gorilla that walks like that. So it's like, can we say, if we're seeing this hairy upright ape that's walking around on its, hind legs all around North America, could this be possibly something that's learned from other Sasquatch if they are existing in sort of some kind of tribal community?
Well, in the science, we refer to either facultative or habitual bipedalism. Facultative, your dog can facultatively hop around bipedally, but it doesn't have the morphology to allow it to habitually employ that means of posture and locomotion. There are other gorillas. Another real famous one is Ambam at the London Zoo, and he and his sister both stand up quite adeptly and walk around, even when they're not carrying things. They just stroll around on their hind limbs. But they have the pelvis and the lower back and the limb proportions, the hips and knees and ankles of a knuckle walking quadruped, but they can stand up just as we can get down on all fours, facultatively. We're certainly not adapted well for it, but everything. I mean, if we can take the Patterson-Gimlin film and so many details reported by eyewitnesses as a benchmark, what you see on that film is adapted to bipedalism. It has the pelvic shape, the upright stance, the position of its head relative to its spine, and limb proportions of a biped. But the notion, and it's a rather antiquated notion that really the old school. I mean, it's just like back when I was a student, it was hammered in. Evolution is one way. You can't reverse an adaptation. Well, that's malarkey. You can you can mutate a gene that turns off a process, and it may only take one single chance mutation to flip that switch back on, and all the hardwiring is already still there, and boom, that trait reappears. We see that with atavistic traits, suppressed traits that suddenly reemerge because they've been released. And so our ideas about evolution are very different. And the notion of convergence on a similar solution to a similar challenge from different starting points, or in this case, from very close starting points. So it's not really so amazing. But there are examples, multiple examples now of other mice and so on. So the argument that, well, since Sasquatch is bipedal, it must be a close human relative. That's one argument. That's one hypothesis. But it could just as easily have occurred that while the Australopithecines emerged from an ape radiation and colonized Africa, probably from West Asia, the ancestors of our modern apes or modern hominins seem to have arisen there. It's very possible that a large terrestrial ape in Eastern Asia, experiencing climatic fluctuations and fragmentations of the habitat in similar fashion to what was experienced in Africa, could have also evolved bipedalism. There's a lot of other biomechanical aspects. I won't go into all the esoteric aspects of that, but there are multiple lines of reasoning that bipedalism could have evolved independently in multiple lineages in parallel.
I just have a quick comment and then a question for anybody who wants to take it. For me, I didn't cover Bigfoot for the longest time when I first started doing my show. Just for me personally, I saw a lack of evidence, physical evidence, until I started interviewing people who've had their own experiences and, actually did experiments communicating with these creatures. I know, Charlie, Ken Swartz from C60, he lives out here in Colorado. He says he has a few Bigfoots out near him that he can communicate with him with wood knocks. It's things like that, and the eyewitness accounts of these things just kind of disappearing off into nowhere after taking a couple of steps. You have the footprints, you have one or two footprints, and then they're gone. That kind of, like, for me, supports an interdimensional aspect. But then again, there's that lack of evidence thing until you talk to some people who have actually experienced this firsthand. And that's when these stories for me get really interesting when it comes to Bigfoot, is people who are communicating and actively, encountering these things. And I think that's where the evidence, as far as now, we're mostly seeing it.
That's interesting.
And my question is, has anyone either tried an experiment with communicating with these with wood knocks, or know someone who has?
Yeah, I know. What's his name? Friggin' Jeff, you know who I'm talking about in our latest. Dave on Whidbey Island. What's his name?
Oh, Dave Ellis. Yeah,
David Ellis and the Olympic Project guys have all been out at certain times, and Dave Ellis is sitting on his Spion, which is like a listening device that usually creepos might sit in an apartment room or a hotel room, or special agents or detectives trying to listen through a wall. Well, this guy's not applying it to that. He's actually going out into the forest, and he's taking this Spion dish hooked up to a tape recorder of some kind, and he's got his headphones on. He can hear things that the other guys in his Squatcher group can't quite hear off in the distance. And so he's initiated communications in these instances where they've heard things off in the distance and they've been like, okay, let's try this out. Let's see if this works. And they'll take 2 rocks, because something that's very common in this phenomenon in terms of the interactions that people have had in the wild is they'll hear wood knocks, which is usually wood hitting on the trunk of a tree, or they'll hear rock clacks, which is 2 rocks being hit together really hard in the distance. And so the Olympic Project folks, David Ellis and his guys, have been doing that, and they've actually had interactions being recorded on tape. And just in my latest doc, we show that one interaction, but this guy's got like a database of many interactions that have happened in just the Olympic National Park in Washington State.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I'm glad Chris mentioned the footprints disappearing, the wood knocks, etc. I think it's a very real glimpse into that fray that Tim Renner and Kutchin offered with their book, and I'm glad somebody mentioned that as well. That fray into the Bigfoot community that we're sort of discussing, and Dr. Meldrum, such a true statement about the wolves and entering into that same sort of deception. Isn't it possible to kind of go back for a moment that the upright evolution is quite Darwinist and, in a matter of fact, a sort of a deception in a way in the dominance alone, and enough to really, the first in each group to do that, I would argue, would be the more dominant. Bringing in the trickster and the Darwinist deception. And I would also argue that we as human beings are quite, deceptive, wearing makeup, clothing, driving cars, and tantalizing jewelry to appear to be things we are not. I don't know.
If I can jump in to ask anyone who's willing to answer, in the last, say, 50 to 80 years, have there been any cases that may suggest any of these beings have been biologically altered in any way, shape, or form?
You mean like they're products of experimentation?
Sorry, genetically. My apologies. Yes.
I just talked to a guy, and granted, take it for what it is. My show is people coming forward and sharing their experiences. So they come forward, they come on the show, and they talk to me about what they've been through. And I don't want to go off on how I conduct myself, but I just talked to a guy. I think it was Monday last week, and he was stationed on Nellis Air Force Base, Area 2. And he said that when he was there was a lot of fishy areas of the base. There was a lot of interesting areas that you weren't allowed to go to. For instance, there was a building there that was a glass building. You really didn't see people going in and out a whole lot, but they were always there was always somebody coming out, but not a whole lot of people going in. The way he talked about it was like there was some kind of, he thought, underground system that they could kind of walk around and stuff. But there was a building that I think he said it was his father-in-law was stationed there as well, and was also one of the main engineers of building a certain type of building that was meant to keep something in. And apparently something broke out. And so his father-in-law was called in the middle of the night, and they told him that some vehicle drove through the gates. And so when he got there, the gates were bent out though. And so he's like, was the vehicle on the inside? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, how'd the gates get bent out? And so it gives this idea that building that he helped engineer and secure was meant to secure something on the inside. And there was these rumors of this hybrid creature that they were experimenting on there and stuff. And I don't remember all the details of it and stuff, but it wasn't Bigfoot. It was something else that they were working on. I think it was like supposedly a mixture of cat and human or something like that.
Thank you.
I think the other thing to keep in mind too, like I remember Grant Cameron was on a few years back, and he was talking about the government wanting to disclose this portal research. And I don't know if it's disinformation or not, but he had recordings of, I think it might have been Kit Green. I don't know if Mike or anybody probably knows more about this, but kind of like the official Weird Desk talking about portals and this thing. So that's why I like to keep the high strangeness part in mind too. I think it's like most of these other mysteries that we're interested in Grimerica, whatever. I think it's all of the above in a way. It's a bit of everything, you know?
Sorry, you go ahead, whoever wants to.
Well, I have a question for the group. Does anybody know the role of the Smithsonian in keeping a lot of this information sort of buried? Because I've heard for a long, long time that institution is not to be trusted, that there's a whole lot of actual history and records and things that they have suppressed. So I wonder, does any, and this isn't limited to Bigfoot, of course, this is any of these unusual creatures. I mean, does anybody know about the role of institutions like the Smithsonian and the London Museum, and I'm sure the Egyptian Museum, of keeping some artifacts suppressed and away from us that have to deal with these types of creatures?
Well, if I could say, I think personally, I do have some data to suggest that they are covering up many different things, whether it's, certain types of humanoids we're not familiar with, or extraterrestrials, or you name it. But if I could chime in and say quickly, I think the disk theory, distributive idea suppression complex, as coined by Eric Weinstein, I think that's a great example of what's going on here, because I think the Smithsonian is one of many of those institutions that any type of proposal or finding that is not in line with, the mainstream way of thinking gets hidden away very easily. So I would just to add to your point, I would dare to say that the Smithsonian is at the helm of that. I don't know if it's at the top, but I would say certainly if you look at a lot of the big time donors and what have you, and there's some evidence to suggest that some money that has been donated has, very quietly disappeared in similar stances, like the way that it has in the Pentagon in those cases. So again, I don't have the answer, but if I could add, then that's what I've been finding so far.
Carly, it's not just the Smithsonian that does this. I mean, all the way down under as well. I had a couple of guests on, they were talking about skulls, and from what I've seen, these were very out of place skulls altogether. So the government came in there, they hid it away. You've also, when it comes to the whole Bigfoot thing, I used to think it was kind of physical over supernatural. But then you look at all the way around the world, you'd have to think by now, logically, we would have some kind of physical evidence, right? But at the same time, Carl Sagan said, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. So I have to go with, can't remember the guy's name from Grimerica there, but the high strangeness aspect of this. I don't think there's any one answer fits all of these cases when it comes to Bigfoot or any of these other cryptids out there. I think it could be a whole host of things that we just don't understand in many cases, And obviously, whether it's America, Britain, down under, there's going to be a rush to hide anything that might call into question the official narrative of who we are, where we come from, and what the hell's going on here,
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with this. Like in my first doc, I'll keep mentioning my doc. Sorry, guys, you're gonna get sick and tired of me saying this, but in the Unwanted Sasquatch, actually, Dr. Meldrum disagreed with me putting this one photo in near the end of the documentary when one of the speakers, who was John Green, who's now passed, he mentions that he's been engaging with the mainstream scientific community his whole life. He said he'd been studying Bigfoot or Sasquatch for over 40 years. And the mainstream scientific institutions never took him seriously, never admitted to conducting any study about them. And he was pretty frustrated about that. And he believed, he said that he kind of was seeing over the years that science in, the academic sort of channels tends to be following a paradigm. And it seems to not like ideas that are new that could challenge the old. And that photo that I used was Charles Darwin kind of on a cross, like an illustration. And I understand why Dr. Meldrum objected to that, because he is a man of faith, and I don't want to insult anybody, but I was just trying to get across like the concept that sometimes the mainstream acts as a institution that has beliefs instead of following, interesting new concepts and saying, hey, what's going on over here that a lot of people are reporting on? It may be on the fringe, but when you still have thousands of people reporting the same thing, these upright, hairy, ape-like, not man, but something else, if the volume of reports are there and we have hair samples and we have footprints being left all, for a vast majority of the sightings there's lots of footprints, and Dr. Meldrum's study on the footprints has been extensive. He seems to think it comes from something that's not us. Then why is the mainstream not saying we should really investigate this and admitting to there's something being there? And I'll just add two more things to that. Like, if anybody's looked at that Washington State atlas, I think it was published by the American Army Corps. It was sort of acknowledging that if you're going to be in this part of Oregon, this part of Washington State, Northern California, that there's been sightings of this type of creature. And if like the military is publishing something like that, isn't that interesting? Like, why would a government organization be taking something like that very seriously back in 1973 to publish into their own text that they're alerting their own staff of if they're going to be working on projects in the wilderness? And I know, Dr. Meldrum, you've said, look, like, there's no man in black knocking on my lab door at my university hassling me, but I've heard, I've interviewed not doctor, I keep saying doctor at the front. I don't want to say that anymore, but Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan's like, an amazing historian in terms of the UFO cover-up that's been going on since at least 1947 in the United States and probably longer in other places. But, he'll say, you're not going to be hassled. You're not going to be having these sort of man in black experiences. For the vast majority of those experiences that have happened in history, it's what you can prove. It's not what you say you've seen or what you say you know. It's what you can prove. And unless we can prove categorically that there is this upright ape that's existing around North America and other parts of the world too, maybe they just don't give a crap and they'll just think you're trying to sell books or something, I don't know.
Speaking of Men in Black, Tony, didn't you say when you were on my show that there was like this kind of faction of Bigfoot Men in Black? These two guys?
Well, yeah, there's reports. I've never had it on my show, but there are reports of people saying that when they have like tangible, like, for instance, the one story that I heard was a guy had shot at one, and I think he hit it in the knee, and right behind the knee was a tree, and he was able to receive a blood sample and hair. He had it on him. And when he had that evidence and stuff, he spoke about it over the phone. And the next day, two guys showed up at the house. I don't think they were Men in Black as much as it was like, I think he described it. The one guy was like gruff looking, and the other guy
looked like a Bigfoot.
Oh yeah, no, like
in a suit, Bigfoot
tie and glasses.
I do want to make a comment real quick on the concept of proof. Real quick on the concept of proof. I run into this problem a lot with my research because in Kennedy, there's a lot of stuff that you're just never going to be able to prove, right? I was a cop for 9 years. I've worked thousands of cases. I understand the investigative process. And a lot of times you have to build a case based on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and you never have proof. The vast majority of cases that go to criminal court, there really is no proof. And people either get forced into taking a deal or it goes to jury trial and they have to look at the circumstantial evidence. So I don't know that necessarily finding any kind of slam dunk proof is even a reality at all.
You know, here's my whole thing is just like, we have been bombarded with this idea that if it doesn't fit into the scientific method or it doesn't fit in to the laws of physics, it's not real and it's impossible. And, you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I know that's a taboo word for some, but I wear it with pride. And I just know that we live in a very special place. And the things that fit outside the laws of physics, I don't want to insult anybody here, are what makes us special, my humble opinion. And there are things that can't be explained in a scientific method and stuff like that. So for me, these amazing things, whether it's paranormal, cryptids, all that stuff, like for me, it's just, I mean, how many people have to come forward saying they saw something? Like, what do they gain from this? I mean, I'm sure there's some people who might write a book or whatever they are, but for the most part, it just seems like it comes with a lot of like negative reaction and pushback because people are afraid to believe outside of what they've been programmed to do. And like, I know we talked a lot about Bigfoot, but there's also like Dogman and you know, Chupacabra and all these other things that I think are pretty amazing. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on that as well. But for me, man, it's just you know, there's things out there that people, it's like if we said right now Bigfoot existed, right? And there'd be a lot of people going, oh, I'm so tired of it. You're crazy. And then CNN came out going, guess what? Bigfoot exists. Everyone's like, it exists. I can't believe it.
This is real.
Can you believe that? Bigfoot
People
is
will be
real.
high-fiving in the streets.
It's just crazy that it's just, they just have to have a certain brand tell them it's real, even though that brand has lied to them thousands and thousands of times. You know, Dr. Meldrum, Darce, the other people here, they do stuff on their own, out of their own pocket of something that they really love. Yet these people who make tons of money from giant corporations over and over again to push a certain narrative, well, they're seen as true of art and intent, which I have no clue how that works. As a stand-up comedian, we are constantly being censored. And I think the groups that get censored the most are stand-up comics and YouTube creators, because we can create stuff for nothing. We don't need bank money or anything like that. And I'm sure with your guys' books and your docs, it's the same thing. You generate your own money to invest into your projects, and they really, really hate that. So we get censored a lot, and we get picked on, and we get told that we're just crazy people. And for me, that means we're onto something. So whether it's whatever cryptids, I without a doubt, with the amount of time and effort that I know everybody on here has put in to study this stuff, I have to believe that there's something more out there. And I do believe we live in a very special place that's a lot more interesting than we believe. And for me, it's like Super Mario, right? Super Mario goes from Donkey Kong, but you know, there's Super Mario Kart out there, and he doesn't get there until he starts opening his eyes and believing in a lot more stuff. So sorry to get weird right there, but that's my opinion.
No, you mentioned the Men in Black, and you know, what are the Men in Black? Because for me, they're like a paranormal topic all into themselves. You know, you get this image of them being G-men from the government, but come on, let's be serious. You know, turning up to Bigfoot sightings, and what would be the point? Then you look at the work of John Keel, and he was like the rock star of the paranormal world back in the day, and he's more famous for the whole Mothman thing. But when you get into the accounts of the Men in Black, and I'm sure Midnight Mike, he'll be able to add to this, they in themselves, there's something kind of non-human about them. Some of them act out of place. It's just total weirdness. What, Mike, would you agree with that? That they themselves, in some instances, are paranormal?
If the accounts are to be believed, and you believe the witnesses, and they've gone on record, the accounts of Men in Black, they started off as what people would consider an intelligence group, or some squadron of an intelligence group, probably Air Force, to go and intimidate witnesses. And then over time, it seemed to have morphed into a hybrid paranormal interaction, and it's like almost poltergeist interaction when you start to talk about them or start to act in a way with intention to expose the secret around UFO topic particularly. And then then that Men in Black would manifest and try to ruin your life. There seems to be a correlation with these fantastic ideas, whether it's Bigfoot, Dogman, the Beast of Bray Road, Mothman. It's almost like once that topic has your attention, other things start to be factored in. For instance, the investigation that happened at the Beast of Bray Road, I believe up in Michigan, there was accounts of this upright walking wolf-like creature. By all accounts, probably this is called a werewolf man or like a wolf man walking around terrorizing sheep, raiding goats. Yeah, an Armenian, crazy Armenian. But it was investigated by the local officials, the wildlife people. You had the police department investigating it. And these people went on record stating that when they were investigating this stuff, they were miles away in their own office. When they were talking about investigating the Dogman, paranormal stuff started happening. Books moving, things moving around their area, books flipping open, being pushed on the floor. So it's like when they started to address these weird things, it started to recognize what they were doing and act towards them.
Really quick, if I could, thanks for having us on, guys. I know I joined a little bit late. Tried to keep my thought process on this without losing it. Really quick, I'm going to go back to what Charlie asked about the Smithsonian. I had first heard about the Smithsonian covering up stuff probably back in 2005. Now, what I had heard from it was from a creationist who had talked about a story where they had dug up giant skeletons, I believe in Arizona, and had sent them to the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian said they lost them, and because it did not.
That was during the gold rush, right?
I believe it was 1881, if I remember it correctly. And then shortly after that, a couple of brothers found one, a pair of them, not far away. Now, granted, I don't trust Google. I don't trust any of the things that you can really find on there, but just kind of hitting a few points that was mentioned in between Charlie's question, and that was pushing a narrative, and then also the frequency of events supporting a lack of evidence. You can look up Smithsonian giants. That's it. And you can find tons and tons of articles of this idea that for years and years and years on end, they have been sent different archaeological dig findings that have been misplaced, have been destroyed, including but not limited to the Smithsonian admitting to having lost or destroyed some because they didn't have a place for it in the museum. So just to go back to what Charlie was saying, I have heard that as well. I don't know if any of the rest of you have, but you can definitely, there's a lot out there on the Smithsonian covering up a lot of evidence and different weird ideas that I think a lot of people probably haven't heard of because it didn't get submitted.
Hey Ben, do you know, is there a Indiana Jones type warehouse somewhere out there with artifacts in it?
I don't know. I'd go to it though.
Yeah, it's called the Vatican.
Area 51. No, but like, you know, going back to, I know we've talked about Men in Black a couple times already, but just like in terms of what that concept to me is just censorship. You know, every time you hear about a story where if it's a plainclothes officer, you know, like somebody in black with a black hat, black shades coming to intimidate a witness or a contactee or somebody that has a piece of evidence to prove their story, or just an actual Air Force officer. Like we listened to the case of Westall 66 that happened in 1966 in Melbourne, Australia. This mass daylight sighting happened. Over 200 people saw possibly one or two discs that were flying over a elementary school and a high school. And a science teacher got involved with, you know, encouraging his kids to go outside. And then the news reported on it. throughout, that month. And this teacher allowed himself to be interviewed by the, I don't know, Melbourne Gazette or something like that. And when he did this interview, the next day, he was visited by the Australian Air Force, 2 personnel from there. And he had not a man in black experience, but he had a suppression experience, which was fear and intimidation. They said to him, look, like, there's no such thing as UFOs, man. Stop talking about it. And if you want to continue talking about it, you'll never teach in this country again. And he shut his mouth until James Fox just released The Phenomenon, which is a really cool documentary. And the first time that teacher's actually been seen on camera talking about his sighting during Westall 66 and his, fear and intimidation incident by not Men in Black, but the Royal Australian Air Force personnel, he spoke about in person, and that was pretty cool. Like it shows that there is an active suppression going on, not just in the United States, Canada, but like Australia, for example, possibly around the world, with certain things that they just don't want us talking about. They don't want us acknowledging. They want us to go back to worshiping celebrity like the Kardashians and, doing whatever menial things that we don't want to challenge ourselves with.
Can I jump in very quickly, if that's cool? My research that I've been doing over the past handful of months has found, and again, I could be wrong, this is just what I found personally, but the suppression of it all has gone from direct intimidation, such as, for whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, the Air Force, you name it, and regardless of the country, it's gone from direct intimidation most of the time because, it's a lot more difficult to get away with certain things in the public level, more to subtle suppression. And what I mean by that is this, in the sense that these type of people will create disinformation, not about the actual topic that you're trying to discuss, but to the extent in which the masses will believe in that topic. So
Richard Doty.
Right. So for example, very, very quickly, Gary McKinnon back in 2001 or 2002 hacked into NASA, the Pentagon, you name it. And long story short, he found a bunch of files that are, debatable as to whether or not it proves the existence of a secret space program, for example. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the US wanted to extradite him back to the States to stand trial. But one of the reasons why Mr. McKinnon, who lives in the United Kingdom, is still a free man today, at least in the UK, is because if he were to be extradited, what would happen is that he would have to testify in court in front of a jury, in front of a judge, as to what he saw when he hacked into the NASA and Pentagon system, right? The judge would have then said, okay, under the Freedom of Information Act, the Pentagon, CIA, you name it, the judge would then say, all right, you have to then corroborate this. And it would actually end up shooting the US in the foot, metaphorically. Because now what would happen is that the evidence that was never there now becomes there, in the sense of sometimes you have to look for what isn't there. And if Gary McKinnon's testimony were to line up with the files that would, arguably be forced to be released, unless they, just claim they lost it, so quote unquote, then it would have proven Gary McKinnon correct. And what I'm trying to say overall is that, again, it's more about the disinformation angle. I think regardless if it's Bigfoot, UFOs, you name it, the Men in Black showing up at your door is not nearly as common for a multitude of reasons. But I think
to chime in where I can with actual proof of Men in Black and bringing in the space agency that is a very real space agency. In every account of Navajo Rangers, almost every account of Navajo Rangers showing up to many of their sightings, which would include Sasquatch and Dogmen, things of this nature, prior to them arriving, almost without, this is with extreme frequency, was BASS agents, which was basically the renamed National Institute of Discovery Science. And you end up with these different groups that just keep changing names. And it's like a constant shuffleboard. And I mean, would you call them Men in Black? No, they're not intimidating the people, but they definitely were getting evidence and everything before anybody else would get to on site and traveling extremely long distances to do so.
Yeah, and I'll add. So I'll just add to what's your name? which guy was talking there about
Brian.
Andrew McKinnon. No, I know Brian. I know you, brother. Hero Paranormal. No. Yeah, no. So with Gary McKinnon, I think what saved his ass from not being extradited to, the United States and possibly Guantanamo Bay was the fact that he suffers or is autistic. He's on the autistic spectrum, and Theresa May officially denied his extradition from the UK to the United States because it would have been a civil rights issue, would have been a human rights issue, because this happened when he was in his early 20s. He has also OCD. He kind of suffers from OCD, and he was obsessed about getting into these servers. And I don't discount that he probably saw some evidence of a secret space program. I agree with you there, but I don't think that's why he wasn't extradited. I think it was actually a more humane reason in the end. But it could have been cool if he was. You got to keep in mind, if he was extradited, that kind of trial that they would have been designing his case for would have never been televised. Right. It would never have actually been put onto the record. Like, it would be considered, a Supreme Court thing. It would not really be recorded like you would expect an OJ case or something like that, right?
It would have made him look stupid. You know how he hacked in there?
Yeah, I know. He just put administrator and empty password. Yeah,
because they left all their routers default passwords.
Well, no, I used to work in IT, and I know that whenever you create a new server or you create a new computer, you set up a new computer. Back in the day, especially, he did this back in Windows, probably XP days, and the servers would have been like Windows Server 2000. They always have a default administrator account that if you are logging into, if you want to log out of your user account and go to the highest level default user administrator account to make changes overall to all the user accounts on the computer, you can just literally log out, type in / and then administrator and hit enter, because the administrator account used to not come loaded with a password. And so it was prone to hacking. And he had an application that he was running that he would find out all of the IP addresses for, Jet Propulsion Lounge's servers, for example, and he would run this application against all those IPs, and this application would really quickly try and log in with that / administrator blank password account, and he got into many in that way. And in a way, he actually showed their security flaws, so he did them a favor. But we're really off topic here.
That's a good bit of
I want to say something real quick, is that these government agencies don't always come as blatant men in black. We have seen forever that we have agents of chaos that show up, and they show up in different forms. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're employees, sometimes they're saying they're coming to understand your research. I just had a gentleman on named Ryan Bledsoe, whose family went through a lot of stuff with UFO sightings, and the CIA, and they did not come in the form. They didn't always come in the form of men in suits. They came in the form of people who were there to want to understand, and misinformation agents. And I just think we have to understand that it was this game is kind of crazy. Like, controlling what we believe is very paramount to these people, these masters of mankind. They want us to believe we're just speck of shits on a rock hurling through space, and we got one shot at this. And if we don't listen to them, we're gonna die early, and that's our only run. And they it's all scarcity, and it's all about leveraging death against the scarcity of life. And It's all that stuff. And when we talk about these things, whether you believe that they are just animals or you believe that they are interdimensional, they are something in which for some reason a lot of people would not want us to know about. That doesn't always mean that the government is actively doing it, but they also could be doing that. We just don't know it. Sometimes it's not as blatant as you see in the movie sometimes.
Real quick, I'm going to recommend this book just real quick. This is called the Giants Who Ruled America, The Missing Skeletons and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up. It goes back to, so what we're talking about, the curation of information and the Smithsonian, it goes back to the early 1900s and the Powell Doctrine. You guys can look that up. It's all has to do with manifest destiny and religion and hurt feelings. So that's all I'll say on that. Great book.
Wait, Mike, you brought up David Paulides at the starting of the podcast, and I'm curious. I don't think I've asked Dr. Meldrum much about this before, but what's your stance on David Paulides, Dr. Meldrum? Because he published, Missing 411, and in one of those books, he references a story which, he's a former police detective, and he did some research, in-depth research on a case where a couple's child went missing in a national park one day. They were having like a group family picnic. The kids were playing hide and go seek. The kid went missing pretty much immediately. There was a search and rescue effort. They combed the forest. They never found a body. And apparently an FBI agent got involved in that case, and this guy was deeply disturbed from everything. And in David Paulides' account, the FBI agent committed suicide for guilt of some kind. And apparently there was like a Green Beret military exercise the very next day in that forest where this kid went missing. And there were other hikers and stuff in this national park the same day the kid went missing. And one couple recognized an event during the midday that they heard a scream up on like this rock ledge, and they looked up and saw what looked like an upright, like ape-like thing carrying a kid with a yellow t-shirt on its shoulder running like off into the forest. And you hear things like this, and then a military exercise just mysteriously being scrambled to go into the forest that next day. Do you think that there's like any military acknowledgement? And when you hear about stories like David Paulides, do you think he's just trying to fictionalize and make something more scary about the Bigfoot or Sasquatch phenomenon? Or do you think there might be some legs to these accounts, especially when a couple's kid, never got found in this case?
Darcy's trying to start fights here.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Well, not on my account, I hope. But,
oh, hell no. I'm not.
Yeah, David and I don't always see eye to eye on things, both topically and personal behavior issues, but of treating other people. But he is very fastidious about not. I would be surprised if he had an account in any of his books that actually pointed a finger at a Sasquatch-like figure involved in any one of his abduction or missing person, not abduction, but missing persons accounts. Because he, one time I made an off-the-cuff remark about missing children, for example, and made reference to one of his books. Boy, he came after me first privately and made it very clear that that he went to great lengths not to draw any conclusions. And that allows him to play it both ways. He speaks more frequently at MUFON conferences than he does at Bigfoot conferences anymore, because he plays the alien abduction angle on those stories. The stories are interesting, and I honestly, I've not read his books, but I've sat through his presentations where he has described the narrative of some of these accounts in excruciating detail, and they're fascinating. They're interesting to the extent that he's reporting the circumstances accurately. I don't know what to say. I honestly don't think they could all be attributed to Sasquatch, snatching children, even though culturally that's a very common theme amongst both indigenous descriptions and otherwise about the behavior of Sasquatch. I mean, here in Idaho, one of the names is the Soavich, which is the eater of children, and cannibalism and child and woman abductions are a very common theme throughout Sasquatch lore. So on the side of the military, again, I think it boils down to more to just the not an institutional policy or posture, but the stories that come back to me are like soldiers that are out on training maneuvers, and their mentor tells them to watch your step. If you see one of these things, do not engage. I've heard stories from soldiers who were on guard duty in military bases who were told by their commanding officer, their supervisor, they're directly above them. Again, you're new to this region. You might see something out there walking on two legs. Do not engage it. They're out there, and just leave them be. There's just that attitude that you discover so many times when you go into a local region and you get acquainted with the locals themselves, and for them it's just part of the landscape. It's a given. I mean, I always think back to one quick story. Dr. Bindernail, just a short one, was up investigating an account on the I think it was the Hoh. Well, maybe no, it was in Canada, so it wasn't the whole reservation, but it was a reservation. There was a sighting, and there were some footprints that had been reported, and he was out on the trail looking for evidence and trying to follow up, and happened upon a group of teenage kids, members of the tribe, and chatting them up, talking about, and he was asking them what they had seen. They said, "Oh yeah, we saw the footprints." And he said, "Well, did you take pictures?" I mean, what any scientist would immediately think to do, you document your evidence, right? And they all just kind of looked at each other and they started laughing. They go, "Well, why would we do that?" It didn't even occur to them that would be a priority, would be to take a picture of these footprints, And so there's something to be said about the attitude and the mindset. For these people, it's just there. It's just part of the worldview. And we place this inordinate significance because we're so fixated, we're so obsessed with this topic that and taking notes and collecting data and all this. And to some people, it's like, why would you bother with that?
Joe and Jen, real quick, would you guys like to jump in, because you guys have been sitting nicely, and I'd love to hear from you guys if you want. Then we'll get back to you, Zed. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I just had a question for Tony. I was telling Sam I'm so used to just listening to all you guys, I forgot I could actually talk to you. I had a question for Tony, maybe for Jeff too. What do you think of the psychic Sasquatch area? Because there are tons of stories of people with, psychic connections to Sasquatch, and that's kind of where it loses me. I can get along with the Sasquatch and the UFOs. There's enough stories that kind of bring those two together, but the psychic one is like, Sasquatch is kind of a bumbling idiot in a lot of stories. So to think that he's like connecting psychically and downloading all this crazy information seems a little far-fetched to me.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started hearing about that was, I would say 2014, 2015, when I first started looking into the Bigfoot topic. And it was almost enough for me to stop doing everything that I do. I was like, what is going on here? Because when I first started looking into Bigfoot, I mean, granted, my opinion has changed a lot. And certainly me and Dr. Meldrum, look at things a little differently. But I definitely was like, this is just a hairy monkey in the woods. And that's why I started the Facebook group I started. I was like, I'm going to go find this freaking thing and just whatever. It's going to be easy. It wasn't easy. And I started hearing more and more of these stories of people talking like psychically. This one lady was telling me how like she talks to Bigfoot and it appears to her in her living room. And to me, I'm just like, and me and Dr. Meldrum probably come from a similar stance when it comes to the theological background. And I just start thinking, I'm not so sure you're actually having any kind of communication with Bigfoot. I'm very short to question people's experiences because one, I wasn't there. And I do believe this world's really freaking crazy. But when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think it might be more along the lines of demonic than anything else. But who knows?
That's kind of the way I lean too. The trickster, element comes in a lot with the Sasquatch, and a lot of the other weird cryptids too. Is a kind of a trickstery type of, like they're fucking with you type of thing.
I have to go, but let me just interject one thing. One of the tells when it comes to those who are claiming psychic communication is just press them on the issue of what are you talking about with Sasquatch? How does the conversation go? And either one, they fall flat on their face and they can't give any coherent response, or two, you get this extremely elaborate. I mean, like the Matthew Johnson, Darcy, you get this elaborate whole storyline about this entire, Atlantean race type thing, or Pleiadian race, and he's been chosen as the spokesman. And they're about to enter and usher in a new era. I mean, it's all the age of Aquarius kind of mumbo jumbo, but it's either or. There's no in between. There's no just, like a conversation with Coco the gorilla where, are you having a nice day? And where do ducks go when they die? And do you want a new kitten? But I mean, at least there's a conversation where there's thoughts exchanged between the two parties involved. But I had
what he had for dinner or anything like that.
Yeah. I had a psychic in my lab here. She came and sought me out, and she was telling me she could tune into these different groups in different states, or even on the other side of the world. And I asked her that. I just point blank said, "Well, what's he saying? What's the conversation like?" It becomes the kumbaya around the campfire, peace and goodwill. It sounds like you'd think you'd gone to a Miss America beauty contest. The question just falls flat. Anyway, it's been interesting and fun, but I have to leave, I'm afraid. So
take care.
Thank you, Dr. Meldrum.
Hey guys, I have to leave as well. Thank you guys for having me on. I just wanted to say, Charlie and Corey, this summer we need to have a Bigfoot expedition in the mountains.
Yes.
Go find this fucker.
Yes.
All right.
Good luck. Have fun. Tell us how it goes.
We're going to need some provisions, though.
Yeah.
Provisions.
Good luck on that. See, here's my whole opinion on the whole thing. Is like, when you're talking about this stuff, I get a little weird when we don't understand how people can't believe us, and then we're so quick to dismiss what other people think. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes to this thing, and this is no disrespect to anybody who was on the show, but I mean, we are there is no handbook for this, that what is right and what is wrong. So whatever it is, it could be more than we ever believed. It could be completely nothing. I mean, we don't know. We're only talking about. So when someone says they could have a psychic thing, if we're talking realms and we're talking dimensions, and this guy's in it, why couldn't he talk to us? I've had people who had UFO experiences, and they were like, I never for 1 second thought about grabbing my phone. It just didn't let me. It is something that did not pop into my head, was to sit here and think to grab my phone. So we don't know why we say that all the time. Why do you grab your phone? If we're going to entertain the notion that these are beings of a higher evolution, they could have like, no, don't grab that phone. That's not the picture you want to take. That's not the picture, right? So we don't know what the answer is. So I get very worried when we start dismissing everything that doesn't make us feel comfortable. Because I think a topic like this is something for people who don't have black belts in this uncomfortable.
If I could, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I believe to a certain extent in the power of the mind, being able to connect with things out of body. For example, we know through the CIA's MK Ultra program, there's a deep history in that. You can look up men who stare at goats, and they made a movie about it and such. That there was a active recruitment and research organization sort of time period that the CIA was doing remote viewing, and remote viewers are still employed by major corporations around the world. They're still employed by military organizations and such. And this is, it's not psychic, but it is some kind of extrasensory ability that the brain has to see things that are, out of our body, out of like our direct connection to our feeling. Like usually your thoughts or projected thoughts are described as imagination, but mind speak, like I don't know, like when you hear about people saying they have telepathy, that is just such a rare thing. Why would it happen with Sasquatch but not from person to person as much?
I think, Darcy, I think that a lot of this stuff that when you go down the path of the weird, it really depends on your base of where you're coming from with what is Bigfoot. There are people who believe that these are alien entities, and if they are alien, then that opens up a whole new Pandora's box. Some people believe that these are demonic entities, and if they're demonic, that opens up a whole new thing. And that's when Joe asked about the whole the mind speak stuff. I guess maybe I didn't. Like my first initial reaction is the idea of for me personally, if I had an experience like that, I wouldn't think, unless I was looking at this giant creature in my room here, I would think that there's something more demonic going on right now if I'm experiencing this, not necessarily Bigfoot. And that's why I said what I said, because a lot of times from my experience of talking to people, they're out in the woods, they experience mind speak and they attribute it to Bigfoot without ever seeing a Bigfoot. And that's when I'm just like, there might be some other things going on here, because, if anybody's heard my show, I go on a lot of topics, and I'm a firm believer that we don't got it figured out, and there's a lot of craziness that can happen. But when it comes to the belief level, that's where, for me, it all starts. Where some people, it's like I gotta see it to believe it, and then some people are like, I'll believe whatever, it's all good. And so, and I always use this example as well. If when it comes to like Bigfoot, or paranormal. If you take an atheist and a theist and you put them in the same room, like a priest and an atheist, and they have a paranormal experience, they're going to walk out explaining that experience. They had the experience. They can't get away from that, but they're going to describe it very differently, because one went into the room believing there's a higher power, and the other one said, no, there's not. So when they have this paranormal experience, one might have a more theistic view of it, and the other one might have more of a scientific view of maybe the mind, And so I just think there's a lot of perspective here when it comes to these topics of, where's the person who had the experience receiving these things? Like where are they starting at, And then we can kind of go from there. So that's just how I look at stuff.
Yeah, I don't discount mind speak at all. Like I know that it's something that's been reported on in the sort of contactee phenomenon for like throughout history. Betty and Barney Hill, they had mind speak. Travis Walton didn't, but there is a lot of evidence that point to if this, and I haven't done any research in terms of the UFO Sasquatch. I have discounted that. Maybe I should find more evidence of.
Darcy, the only thing I disagreed with you on is when you said the XMK Ultra program.
If I could chime in really quickly to, regardless if it's UFO, Bigfoot, you name it, to add to Darcy and Sam's point as well from an intelligence angle. It's very basic common knowledge that in the CIA, it's all about, at least on the field level, when it comes to the agents and the case officers, it's all about being good conversationalists, in the sense of, it goes from, for example, if I were to ask you guys, do you believe in UFOs? you then reply with, well, do you believe in it, right? And now you guys, by asking that question back to me, have taken over the conversation. And if we apply that method to a much larger scale, what then happens is you control the narrative, because if you bring yourself down before anybody else does, you control the way that it happens. Right. And by doing that, it creates I'm not trying to get into the whole, psyop on top of psyop kind of aspect, but it brings that sort of intelligence angle of, questioning the extent in which you actually believe in the topic instead of the topic itself. You know what I mean?
I completely agree that there's a lot of manipulation on that. I got a jam, but I just got one more question. Do we have any, with I'm excited about Godzilla versus King Kong. I don't know about you guys, but that is a national holiday for me, okay? So I'm super excited. Do we have any stories of cryptid wars? Like, I know we had, I had Tony on talking about the Bigfoot wars of 1855. But I mean, do we have Bigfoot versus Dogman, winner takes all, squared, anything like that? I mean, because I'd love to hear about that.
No, the only other wooded, mysterious creature that's really been fascinating me lately is this thing called the rake. Does anybody know anything about the rake? Because that thing, and when I see these videos of the rake, it just blows me away. I asked a question about fighting, and you're asking about a fucking rake. I want to know. Anybody know any fights out there?
I mean, I'll take both those. One, as far as the fights go, I don't know about like Bigfoot on Dogman action, but there's a lot of like legends, especially of like was
that a Pornhub category?
I knew you were gonna go there. As soon as I was saying, I was like, oh, this is the wrong guy to say it to. But Darcy, I know I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's those guys up in the cabin northwest of the country, and they got
Sierra Sounds.
No, the Siege of Hanabi, I think it was. But like it's the idea that the Bigfoot attacking human and they had to defend themselves and things like that. But as far as rake goes, I've talked to off the top of my head, I've talked to 3 different people who have had these experiences with these rake things. And to be honest with you, when people describe them to me, it just seems evil. Like people say Dogman evil, like rake's on another level. I mean, the way they describe it looking, I just didn't.
What is a rake? What does it look like?
I'll look at it.
Well,
it's like a white, really skinny, crackhead looking thing.
Sort of translucent.
So it's from Vegas.
Too.
Yeah, like a lot of the people that I've heard describe it, kind of looks almost like Gollum from Lord of the Rings in a sense. But like a soul sulking elemental. Yeah, exactly. And like just 2 weeks ago, I put out a show. The first half of the show was a guy who came on, and he woke up one night to one of these creatures coming in, trying to get into his window. His stepbrother called it the monkey man and had seen it before, but he's like, dude, this was no Bigfoot or something. This was like you could see the skin on and stuff. And he had found a sketch online that almost matched perfectly to what he saw. And that's why he started calling it the rape, because he didn't know what else to call it.
Did he let it in? What happened?
Oh, yeah. So let me finish that. He got out of his bed, got his gun, but it had already taken off by that point. But there was another guy that I had talked to where he had come home with his wife, and they saw this thing sitting in the, I think that it was either his backyard or maybe it was his neighbor's backyard facing his house, but it was like eyeing up the house, like it was going to get in there and stuff. And then the first time I ever talked to somebody was down in Houston. I did a live show in Houston, and I had a guy come out from Dallas who him and his friend were driving down a major highway, broad daylight, and they saw 2 of these things walking up a hillside. And so his friend sketched it, and I showed it to the people at the show. But they're not. I don't get a ton of people coming on to talk about that stuff, but even the sounds that people say they make, there's these videos online and stuff of people saying it was the rake sound and stuff. And it's just like, golly, like if I heard that in person, man, I wouldn't do my show anymore. And I'd probably crap my pants for about 5 days.
Well, Tony, good to see you again, brother. By the way, we'll need to hang out again soon, man. But this rake thing, I get on Lon Strickler, and he's the guy behind Phantoms and Monsters website. Dan Gordon, who somebody mentioned earlier as well, he comes on. And they have both said to me, independent of one another, right now, it's the rake that's the number one thing that's getting reported. And I was actually asking about the Mothman sightings that had been around Illinois, and I thought that would have been the most kind of common thing that's been seen. But no, it's this rake. And if people look at the rake, this is a really weird one for me, but, you could almost make a case or if at some time in the distant past, for whatever reason, be a cataclysm or something, humans went underground into tunnels, into caves, and if they had to stay there generationally over time, you'd start to adapt to the cave. So you might start losing the melatonin in your skin. Your eyes might start getting bigger. You would end up crouched over, maybe walking on all fours because of the spaces down there. I don't know whether it's paranormal or what we're looking at here, guys. I could make a case for a lot of things, but the plethora of people seeing this thing right now, it's kind of anomalous into itself,
Well, as the elite goes down into their underground bunkers and their underground cabins, they're forcing all these people out.
They're displacing the rake population.
The fascinating thing about the rake for me was like, where does it fit in the human evolution? Because it seems as a humanoid, it would have to fit in somewhere, and it just seems a big puzzle to me.
Corey, I think you looking at it as a humanoid at all from our lineage would be just probably the wrong starting point in my book. I don't know. I would disagree from a Native American perspective, because much like in Skinwalker lore, they covered themselves with white powders to assimilate almost that creature in a way. And I don't know. I think were they trying? It's a broad question, but when Barker was mentioning that, I just kind of drew that correlation that in many of the rituals they would cover themselves in white powder when trying to interact with or draw these darker entities that are like a rake or a Wendigo or things of that nature, a Skinwalker, or any kind of shape-shifting animal.
I was trying to find some old video footage that I'd seen a long time ago, but I couldn't find it. Maybe you guys will figure it out for me, but everybody's heard of Skinwalker Ranch, and on Skinwalker Ranch, the NIDS team and the many different owners of that estate said they'd seen all kinds of crazy stuff. Like the NIDS team said they actually had a night that they were recording some kind of portal that opened up in the middle of the ranch ground, and then what looked like a Sasquatch climbing out of it and then running off into the forest.
Well, they said specifically it was a very large, dark creature that ran fast.
Yeah. I mean, I say Sasquatch, but
exactly. So you got Sasquatch bias, my friend.
I do, my friend. But like you hear about that, and then you guys are talking about the rake, and there was another ranch. I can't find it, and I've been looking at this stuff since I was a kid. Still am a kid in a lot of ways, but I was checking out. Have you guys ever heard of the Bradshaw farm or the Bradshaw Ranch?
Yeah, in Sedona. Yeah, absolutely. I've been there many times.
Really? Okay, so there was a video, like the Bradshaws, their story is really interesting too, because the Skinwalker Ranch has, for a while it was kind of a no-go. Then Robert Bigelow bought the ranch, and now it's there's a TV show being filmed on it, and they saw a cow die or something, and Eureka, we've got proof of something happening. But the Bradshaw Ranch is one of these places or the Bradshaw Farm, however you guys try and find it. I couldn't find the video, but there's stories about this ranch in Sedona, and this family was living on it for a time, and they reported all kinds of paranormal and anomalous, really strange stuff with entities like rakes appearing and disappearing and freaking them out. And apparently now, I don't know if it's true, but no one can go to this property. Like the American government has cordoned it off and said, you can't trespass here anymore. It's illegal. And these videos surfaced online back in the 90s of what looked like, the son, one of the youngest Bradshaws, had a mini DV camcorder and was recording, looking around him at one point in the forest line somewhere on the property. And he stopped for a second and then started zooming in on this sort of bush. And you can see this like translucent like head kind of peer around the bush, and it has this like big almond shaped eyes, and then it looks at them and then kind of, you know, hides its head and then pokes its head back out. And that was like a really creepy video I saw of a you know, I would even consider that kind of a rake, but and like video proof of something like that. But the more interesting story is that that family just got ushered off of the property, and you can't go there anymore. And there's things like this video that surfaced from people's experiences there. The thing about the Skinwalker Ranch, you never actually get to see videos that the NIDS team recorded or any of the information during Robert Bigelow's time owning it.
True.
I have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you want to get, any of you want to get more information, Tom Dongo is the guy to talk to. He's the resident expert there when it comes to the Bradshaw Ranch. And I've gone many times. It's legit, like whatever is going on. And yeah, they ushered in due to tax purposes. They ushered in, it was donated because of that to Arizona State University, and they're currently doing cottonwood growth studies. So they have these little cottonwood trees that are growing with all this camera equipment. So
that's amazing.
There's also another ranch, and there's another ranch in Phoenix called Stardust Ranch, where a guy who owned it, he killed 3 gray aliens with a samurai sword.
Yeah, that's John Edmonds.
When I hear stories about Skinwalker Ranch in particular, a lot of people who go there, they have like hallucinations. They see mist turn into wolves and weird stuff like that. And the first thing that comes to my mind after having extensively studied MK Ultra and the CIA is that they learned in the 1950s how to aerosolize LSD and other hallucinogens. So one of my theories was that it was when these people are seeing hallucinations as they come onto these different properties, that was a possibility to explain what they were seeing. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would argue, just to go along those same CIA documents and declassification routes, that magic has also perfectly been declassified as a CIA document. And, you know, therefore it leaves the dark arts. So yeah, you could technically run tons of like, you know, LSD, which this sounds like a great project, but you know, through the ground to different areas on a multi-thousand-acre plateau and ridgeline. But I think that the dark arts could also possibly explain part of it. But I'm not arguing with the MK Ultra man, because I'm with you. And you know, that MK to skull new technology is off the chain.
One thing about MK Ultra that a lot of people don't really see is that while the mind control was like the cover, really, MK Ultra was kind of a front for all the biological weapon stuff that they're still working on to this very day. So, but yeah, they cropped us at a town in the Midwest. There's very little information on that because the people killed each other. And George White himself released an aerosol container of LSD in the subway system in New York in the 1950s. So I don't put it beyond them to do things like that.
I don't know about anyone else, but I've never allegedly in my acid experience ever seen anything like a dogman or any kind of cryptid. I've never seen anything crazy like that, and I've done allegedly again a pretty high dose, and I never saw anything that wasn't there. I saw weird shit moving, but I've never seen a cryptid on LSD. So I
feel like LSD is the perfect scapegoat, if you will, for the authorities to say somebody didn't have a credible experience with their own right mind. You know, you could say, well, I mean, for example, folks that started reporting UFOs back in the 1940s and 50s, their original nickname by mass media was crackpots. They basically accused them of being these, you know, rednecks that possibly were a little too deep into their own moonshine and made them hallucinate. So I would be scared to associate, you know, cryptid type sightings or UFO sightings with LSD, vapor LSD sprays by, I don't know, MK Ultramen. I have no idea where it goes, but I don't know. I don't think so.
I think Nick Redfern just wrote a book dissecting Rendlesham Forest and how that whole Rendlesham Forest incident in the early 80s could have been some sort of mind control experiment in combination with hallucinogens and a well orchestrated play acting. You can make shit up. I don't know if I buy into it, but I think it's an interesting theory to consider.
Ooh, why would Nick Redfern write that?
You have to read a book. You know,
Lack of content. I don't know.
He must have
Maybe.
some new info, or it must be a new spin on it. For
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I don't think Nick would write something that doesn't have some fresh content.
Yeah.
I'll post a link.
That's the only reason I was thinking. I would agree with that.
And I think this is, for me, the more we go along here, the more I don't really care about the physical evidence or anything like that. I mean, materialism's falling on its face, really. And people, we know so many people that have had spiritual experiences or experiences with this stuff that it's just a matter, like, proof might not be there, but the plethora of evidence is really what's just going to turn the tables. I mean, it's changed so much over the last, I think, like 10 years, 10, 15 years. People are feeling more comfortable to come forward with experiences. And I think it's just going to open up from here more and more. The problem is like what, what's his name was saying there, Zed, about the disinformation. Now it's easier. Now they have the subtle manipulation. It's easier to let false stories propagate in the media and suppress the stuff with real evidence. And so we're, now instead of the media focusing on the UFO stories that can be proved fake, now that sort of is shifting, but they can easily do it with all these cryptid and other strange things. Just push the stuff that they know is silly and suppress the stuff that might have legs.
No doubt. It's like you don't even need Men in Black anymore. You just have mass media.
Algorithms.
You have algorithms with Google and social media that will push people to certain ideas. Even if we're all talking about our theories, and my phone is a Google phone, and anytime I search something about cryptocurrency or extraterrestrial life, that type of information, my Google News in my phone is loaded with like cryptocurrency news. It's loaded with like mainstream, like Science America, Scientific Institute of America, sort of
popular
like
mechanics,
popular mechanics, like stuff that's sort of debunking extraterrestrial stuff. Cryptocurrency, I guess, is accepted, so it's like adding stuff like that. But I've been talking about all kinds, like Sasquatch never pops up in that. I don't know why. And I'm like, it makes me think that there's certain algorithms that are being fed into that they want reinforced by the general public. And there's certain algorithms that they just want the general public to be asleep to and not really care about. And that's like the greatest information suppression right there. Like, you don't need Men in Black. You may need somebody like Richard Doty going to the UFO conferences and becoming a popular speaker like David Wilcock and ending up like soaking up all the attention and distracting people from the really credible history of things that have been going on. But I think, like algorithms and just like all of our artificial intelligence is being employed by the powers that be, I'd say.
And I'm going to jump in just because I do have to go, but somebody had mentioned, I agree about your artificial intelligence and tying into that. Somebody had mentioned like crazy people seeing wolves turn into dust or what, something along that. I was one of the two guys that saw that. So I'm one of the crazies. And in that, and I'm actually looking at the awesome image that I got from you, Tony, killer image of the wolf turning into like this departalized matter that it kind of came that way and it left that way. And my theory on what that could be is in fact alien AI or something like that. And what I mean by that is, as I heard this, there was like an energy and a buzzing. And when we were right there, it was myself and Ryan Skinner. And this thing was within, it was bordering on our personal space within that 6 foot mask radius. And these little things were like particulates. They seemed like nanotechnology of sorts. Maybe all of them, much like a drone swarm, could work together and become something, and then come apart and become something else. So anyway, with that, I got to go. And I wish I could stay longer.
Shoot me an email. I want to talk to you more.
Okay, brother, I will. Thank you to all you guys.
See you, bro.
All right, take care.
Maybe we should start winding down too. I mean, geez, it's getting late. I mean, God.
Nah.
I gotta be on with Joe Roop at midnight tonight.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
It's gonna be a long one for me. It's gonna be a long day.
Real quick, I wanted to mention, because I didn't get a chance to mention it before. I was at Melbourne, who was on. And you asked him about missing 411 and David Paulides. I saw David Paulides talk in Phoenix in 2020 in January, and MUFON hosted him to come talk. And the first part of his talk, he did an hour and a half talking about Bigfoot. And then the second part was, the second hour and a half was all about missing 411. And he said, do not jump to any conclusions that either one of those talks have anyone to do with one another. But I have all the audio. He ran down quite a few interesting tidbits about Bigfoot and his finding, DNA testing, and what he believes Bigfoot to be. And then, an hour later, he was talking about missing 411, all under the MUFON umbrella. So I think David Paulides' conclusions and thoughts on Bigfoot are quite interesting. And it's kind of unfortunate that the infighting that I talked about within the Bigfoot community is pretty real, I guess.
Mike, I would say that one of the most interesting theories that I heard along the lines of missing 401 came from you with the idea of the simulation. My mind popped when you said that about going out so far into the woods, and instead of, making up a whole landscape for this one character, they just removed the character from the simulation. Like, I was just like, holy crap. Never thought about that one. You're looking like you don't remember saying that, but I know I heard it from you.
No, I read it on the show, and I forget who came up with it. I have it sourced. I just read it on the show. Someone came up with it and then wound up deleting their post. It no longer exists on Reddit. I have it saved.
Oh, man.
But yeah, it has to come down to with processing power. Is the simulation going to waste all that processing power into rendering the beautiful forest just for your eyes? No, it's easier just to throw you into a rock.
Yeah.
I think that story I talked about earlier with that couple that lost their kid and there was an FBI agent, all that stuff. That was I literally listened to a podcast. I think it was Coast to Coast Radio that David Paulides was on, and he talked about that.
Oh yeah, those events happened.
Yeah. So and he alluded in that show to it being this kind of Bigfoot snatching incident where the Green Beret. So I'm surprised that he would, write 2 books about Bigfoot. I have one of them. I have the Hoopa Project.
Yeah.
And then he writes Missing 411, and then he won't allow us to connect the two.
Well, we can't. He just doesn't like it.
Yeah. Well, why?
I don't know.
That's such a contradictory.
If you read the backs of his books, he does drop hints, but they're all different. At the backs of books, he'll leave little stories that you can correlate to an earlier story in Missing 411, like people being chased up a tree, and then he references a guy in 1960 being chased up a tree by 2 robot aliens and 3 humanoids. He directly references that story in a Missing 411 book, and so we're left to make these jumps and conclusions about what is going on.
I've heard about that story. Yeah.
So that he doesn't come off as his own belief that's what it is. He kind of throws it out there it could be this, but that's for you to decide. I'm not going to say it.
It's fun. It's a fun topic.
Do you think there's a capitalistic mindset to that? I mean, just the idea that knowing that the kind of stories he has would appeal to certain audiences. So instead of courting himself into one market or something, he kind of just lets it open for anybody who.
It's the smartest move, probably. It goes to crime and mystery. It goes to paranormal, UFOs. It goes everywhere. Government conspiracy.
Yeah, my friend Thomas Steenberg, he thinks that David Paulides backed. I can't remember who the researcher is, but I'll look it up. This guy who created this theory that John Green and the guys that originally made the Patterson-Gimlin film and did that whole research study actually found a family of Sasquatch and slaughtered them. Has anybody heard of this?
No.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Do you know who I'm talking about here? I can't remember who it is, Tony, but like
that did the slaughtering.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe there's more. Maybe there's
who created that story, because like apparently David Paulides got behind the guy who created that story about John Green and them slaughtering Patty and her whole family after that video was recorded.
Yeah,
and
he's that guy that does all the video stuff.
Is it MK Davis?
MK Davis. That's who
MK Davis. So apparently Paulides got behind MK Davis, and MK Davis like took videos of the Patterson-Gimlin film and took stills and changed the sepia tone and saturation to look like there was blood in the like you know, the sandbar and stuff there, but obviously like it's just, you know, doctored imagery.
Right.
And years later, David Paulides has never gone back on that, but some people have never sort of forgiven him for acknowledging MK Davis's story, because first of all, John Green, I've interviewed him. He's passed away now, but he was just like the most chill dude. He would never, I don't think he even was a hunter. He ran a newspaper in northern British Columbia, and that's how he got into the Bigfoot Sasquatch topic. So I don't think he was slaughtering Patty, but
you might be thinking about two different. Like the one I'm thinking about is recently it made a rounds, and I thought it was MK Davis. Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, you're right. You're right.
Well, they were talking like there was a big issue where Bob Gimlin, people were saying that he was part of the whole slaughtering of these.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was it. And apparently, like when it originally came up, David Paulides had backed that theory, and that pissed off Dr. Meldrum, because Dr. Meldrum was friends with like John Green and all these folks like Bob Gimlin and such. He stopped acknowledging the story and has gone on to become very successful with Missing 411 and all the other stuff he's done. But it'd be interesting if he ever like that whole account kind of bothers me, because it seems to stink of fear mongering to sell something, you know, because fear is a great motivation or motivational tool to spread a story. And if you're saying like Patty was slaughtered after that 8mm film was made, then it makes the story bigger than it already is, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of personal pettiness that goes on behind the scenes with the Bigfoot community, especially the higher up you go in with those guys. And you know, I remember when that was happening. I think it was happening because I was with Bob in Houston, and I'm pretty sure it was happening around that time. And like I'm just like sitting here with the guy who's, you know, well into his 80s, you know, and he's dealing with the whole world messaging him saying, "You killed Patty, you killed the babies." And it's just like, come on, guys. Like seriously, it's this idea, and this is what frustrates me, is that it's this idea that we constantly want more. So if we can't find a new story or something, we're going to recreate a narrative on an old story, and that's what they do, and it drives me insane. And especially to see an old man like Bob, I mean, just let him be in peace. I mean, let him go.
Well, guys, I think we're going to have to cut it there and wind it down. Do you guys want to promote your website there? Corey, you want to, what website can people find you at?
CoreyHughes.org. That has all my original research. As far as my broadcasts, they're kind of scattered on the Forbidden Knowledge News channel. One thing I do want to talk about is that April 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we are doing the very first exclusive Rockfin convention. Over those 3 days, we'll be doing 12 hours live streaming per day, 12 speakers, and it'll be a Rockfin exclusive for the premium subscribers. So definitely, Rockfin's excited about it. We're excited about it. It's going to be a good time.
Tony.
Yeah, host of the Confessionals podcast. I interview people who email me about their paranormal experiences. We talk about, anything from, hauntings to Bigfoot to abductions to everything in between. If it's outside the norm, we'll talk about it and we'll have them share it on the show. And I am launching a new show on Fringe.fm. It's going to be called Rage Against Dystopia. And Joe, the owner of the station, said I could say whatever I want. So I am going into this preparing to piss a lot of people off, because if everybody else can say what they want to say, well, by golly, Tony's going to start saying what he thinks too.
Yeah.
So,
Nice.
And Darcy.
Yeah, people can just check out my website. I've got my trailers for my films there, posters. If you want to watch the film, just click on the poster and it'll take you through to a streaming service you can watch it on. It's www.occultjourneys.com. And Darcy, we're on Facebook, Instagram. If you want to connect about anything, let me know.
Well, cool.
Let me just say real quick, Darcy, I watched your movie. It was the first film that I watched that got me interested in the subject. And I've, for the last month, tried to absorb every other film, YouTube video, documentary on the subject. So thank you for that.
Oh, on Bigfoot? Which one?
Isn't yours the unwanted Bigfoot or unwanted Bigfoot?
Unwanted Sasquatch.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
cool. All right.
Sorry. Yeah, that's the first one I
Nice.
watched like a month ago. It turned the light on for me for sure.
All right, sick. Thanks, man. Appreciate your
and
feedback.
for everyone else who's listening, look for the description. We'll update it with all the links for everyone who appeared on here. So that'll be updated tomorrow morning. So thanks, everyone. Ricky, Charlie, thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for running the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining
Been
us.
good. Thanks. Good night, guys.
See you guys.
Bye.